you'd like to turn to Psalm 35. Psalm 35. This is a psalm that is simply entitled a Psalm of David. It's difficult to assign the psalm to a particular event in the life of David. There are many which the psalm would fit. The psalm falls in the category of what is called imprecatory psalms. Psalm 5, Psalm 10, 17, this psalm, Psalm 58, Psalm 59, Psalm 69, Psalm 70, Psalm 79, Psalm 83, Psalm 109, Psalm 129, Psalm 137, Psalm 140. All fall in this category. These are psalms where the psalmist asks God to bring down judgment upon his enemies, to bring down curses upon his enemies, to cause calamity upon his enemies. They are psalms that are a cry for divine vengeance, an appeal to God to pour out his wrath upon the enemies of the psalmist. So they are obviously psalms of adverse circumstances, psalms of desperation. They are psalms where the psalmist has reached his end. He's tired of the way things are. They are psalms founded in a sense of utter helplessness on the part of the psalmist. There are many lessons in these psalms for the child of God. Today we want to read verse 10. All my bones shall say, Lord, who is like unto thee, which delivered the poor from him that is too strong for him, yea, the poor and the needy from him that spoileth him. We want to develop the message, the thought around these words, all my bones shall say. All my bones shall say. We hear and use the phrase, down to the bone. It is a phrase used to emphasize. Someone might say, I'm chilled to the bone. They're emphasizing how cold they are. Or I worked my fingers to the bone. I was cut to the bone. Speaking of hurt. These all express an extreme degree. It conveys the thought of all the way through. So the imagery of all my bones shall say conveys the idea of something deep and internal. When David said, all my bones shall say, he is expressing something that has affected him deeply. When he says, all my bones shall say, he is saying that he would give his entire being and whatever strength he had until there was nothing left, and this to something specific. All my bones shall say. It is every fiber of our being, down to the bones. So that's our subject, down to the bones. In our text, David is saying, if God would pour judgment down upon His enemies, that He would rejoice and be filled with praise. We see that in verse 9. And then we read verse 10. In the tone of rejoicing, in the tone of praise, all my bones shall say, Lord, who is like unto Thee? That's what his bones, that's what he would say with all his bones. So again, each of these psalms that fall into this category speak of very severe circumstances. So we want to look, first of all, at the circumstances and the surroundings of the psalmist here in Psalm 35. Those whom the psalmist was surrounded by and their activity, they're all described here in this 35th Psalm. Notice in verse 1, he speaks of those who strive with me. The word strive speaks of their effort and their energy to oppose. They fight against them that fight against me. So they strive with me. They fight against me. Verse 3. We see they persecute me. Verse 4. They seek after my soul. That is, they desire my soul. They pursue my soul. He goes on there at the end and says, that devise my hurt. That is, they plot to hurt me, to bring harm into my life. In verse 7, for without cause have they hid for me their net. Without cause they have set traps, which without cause they have digged for my soul. They set these traps, and they do so very intently. They have digged for my soul. Verse 10, we read that they are too strong for him. In verse 11, false witnesses did rise up. In verse 12, we read they rewarded me evil for good. I did what was right, and they treated me evil, to the spoiling or ruining of my soul. Verse 15. In mine adversity, that's continued difficulty, they rejoiced. They rejoiced and gathered themselves together in rejoicing of my adversity. Yea, the abjects, the smiters, gather themselves together against me. And I knew it not. They did tear me and cease not. This they did unceasingly. Verse 16. He refers to them as hypocritical mockers in feasts. They gnashed upon me with their teeth. Verse 17, we read of their destructions. In verse 19, them that are mine enemies wrongfully rejoice over me. And then we go on and it says, they hate me without a cause. In verse 20, they speak not peace, but they devise deceitful matters against them that are quiet in the land. They devise deceitful matters, deceptive misleadings. Verse 21, they open their mouth wide against me. Verse 25, let them not say we have swallowed him up. That's their desire, was to consume. And then in verse 26, rejoice at mine hurt. They magnify themselves against me. That is, they make themselves larger. Speaking of intimidation. So this is the setting of the psalm. And in verse 13 and 14, but as for me, when they were sick, my clothing was sackcloth. I humbled my soul with fasting, and my prayer returneth unto mine own bosom. That's what we should do. And he says, I behaved myself as though he had been my friend or brother. I bowed down heavily as one that mourneth for his mother. I was burdened for them. But we see he feels betrayed, treated unfairly. He feels that injustice has been done. He says twice in verse 7, without cause. He repeats it again in verse 19, without cause. So, and then in mine enemies wrongfully, verse 19. Also in the psalm, there is a sense of helplessness. There is a sense of desperation. In each one of these psalms that fall into this category where the psalmist is pleading with God to pour judgment down, they have reached their end. And in desperation, they cry out for the judgment of God. It's pretty much where we're getting to in our own land. We see in verse 1 that he's pleading with God. He says, plead my cause. That speaks of desperation and helplessness. In verse 2, he recognizes his need of God's help. Take hold of shield and buckler, and stand up for mine help. He's pleading. He needs God's help. Hear him in verse 3. Draw out also the spear, and stop the way against them that persecute me. Say unto my soul, I am thy salvation. Notice, stop the way against them that persecute me. He's saying, Lord, make it stop. Make it stop. We can see how you get to that point. We're at that point now. Lord, make it stop. Just make it stop. Also in verse 3, he says, say unto my soul. That is, speak unto me in a way that reaches to the depths of my soul. I am thy salvation. That is, he needed assurance from the Lord. That's the only thing that would help him in his circumstances. In verse 4, he says, let them be turned back. In verse 5, let them be a shaft before the wind. And the angel of the Lord chased them. He wanted it gone. He needed reprieve. He says, make it stop. Cause it to go away. So here's a man in need of reprieve. In verse 9, and my soul shall be joyful in the Lord. That is, if God would do these things, it shall rejoice in his salvation. So here is a man who could use some rejoicing. In verse 10, he sees himself as poor and needy. Poor meaning deficient. And because I am deficient, I am needy. The two go together. And he sees his enemies as too strong for him in verse 10. In verse 17, Lord, how long wilt thou look on? Rescue my soul from their destructions. So we hear him, Lord, how long? How long? He expresses this sentiment in verse 22 as well. O Lord, keep not silence. He's weary. And he's growing impatient. Also in verse 17, rescue my soul. He feels an urgent need of rescue. Verse 22, O Lord, Adonai, Supreme Master, be not far from me. He feels the need of God's nearness. The psalmist was in circumstances that greatly impacted his life. Impacted the very depths of his being. And he wants it to stop. And we can understand that. But he says here in verse 10, that is, if God would do these things, all my bones shall say, Lord, who is like unto thee? I want to look at this as what we need all the time. It's what is needed in these circumstances. In verses 9 and 10, David again expresses what he would do were the Lord to defeat his enemies. And he's speaking of praise. He states the same sentiment in verse 28, and my tongue shall speak of thy righteousness and of thy praise all the day long. But what is stated in these verses is what we ought to feel and do while in the circumstances that David found himself. Whether God delivers or not, this ought to be what we do. Again, our text is verse 10. where we hear David say, all my bones, every fiber of my being shall say. He feels deeply what he is going to say. He's affected, he's moved by what he's going to say. Lord, who is like unto thee? And oh, that our entire being would feel such. All the way down to the bone. Lord, who is like unto thee? It is our entire being taken up with who He is. Oh, that we would feel such deep within. So there is a felt recognition of the person of the Lord. So let's look at this. All my bones shall say, Lord. And notice, there's a comma. That's a pause. All my bones, deep from within, shall say, Lord. Pause. Pause. With my entire being and with all that is in me, I will say, Lord. It is a deeply felt recognition. We say Lord all the time. But how deeply do we feel it? How deeply are we affected? Does it go all the way down to the bone? All my bones shall say, Lord. That should be us regardless of circumstances, regardless of surroundings. All my bones shall say, Lord, comma, pause. Comes from deep within. It has an effect upon our entire being. Lord. That should have an effect, an impact upon our attitude. Upon our attitude toward our circumstances. Upon our attitude toward our surroundings. All my bones shall say, Lord. Oh, to recognize with all that is in us who He is. Who He is. He's Lord. He's eternal. He's self-existent. He's immutable. He's all-sufficient. Comma. Pause. Think about it. And as such, He reigns. And He's high above all. He's Lord of hosts. He's King. All my bones shall say, Lord, comma, or pause. He's righteous. He's long-suffering. He's all-knowing. He's able. He's gracious. He's merciful. He's true. He's living. All my bones shall say, Lord. He is the one who provides. He is the physician. In other words, He is the one who can bring relief and restore and cure and repair and fix and mend, revive and renew. All my bones shall say, Lord. He is Jehovah. He is Jehovah Shalom. That is, He is our appeasement. He is our calm. He is our security. He is our assurance. He's our well-being. He's our safety. He's our health. He's our strength. All my bones shall say, Lord. Deeply affected by who He is. He is our shepherd. That is, He is our keeper, our provider, our sustainer, our companion, our friend. All my bones shall say, Lord. He is the one who's there, wherever there is. The infinite, there for the finite. The Almighty, there for weakness. The Omniscient One, there for ignorance. The All-Sufficient One, there for our poverty and need. Wherever there is, He is there for us. And all my bones shall say, Lord. Oh, that our entire being, everything in us, would acknowledge Him as Lord, the one who has dominion over all things. Whatever our circumstances, whatever our surroundings, may we feel in our bones, Lord, Lord. May that deeply impact us, Lord. Oh, there's a lot of things that impact us deeply. But what about Lord? With all my bones, Lord. It is acknowledging Him with absolute persuasion and conviction from deep within our soul that He is the authority of our lives. Do we feel that deep within, or do we fight against it? He is master. He is ruler. He is owner. May we feel that all the way down to the bone. In the midst of the danger, in the midst of the need, in the midst of the weakness, in the midst of the inability, and in the midst of the burdens and the difficulties and the problems, and in the midst of the battles and the obstacles, we need to identify with this. All my bones shall say, Lord, Lord. Rely upon Him. See your need from deep within to depend upon Him. To lean upon Him. To seek Him. To look to Him. To come to Him. And to rest in Him. All my bones shall say, Lord. That is a recognition of who He is from deep within. It is who He is impacting our entire being. Oh, that would be so. But it goes on. There is also a felt recognition of His greatness. All my bones shall say, Lord, comma, Pause. Who is like unto thee? Who is like unto thee? Oh, that we would feel that deep within. Who is like unto thee? Oh, that we would be deeply affected by that. That we would be moved by who is like unto thee. All of my bones shall say, Lord. Pause. Who is like unto thee? And then there's another comma or pause. Lord. Pause. Think about it. Think about it. Who is like unto thee? Comma. Pause. Think about that. Oh, to behold and be affected by His greatness. We talk about the sovereignty of God. We sing about His greatness. But are we deeply affected? Are we deeply affected? Down to the bone, if you will. We hear Isaiah say in Isaiah 40 verse 18, to whom will you liken God? That's what the psalmist is saying. Who is like unto thee? He feels His greatness. We can feel a lot of things. And we can feel a lot of things all the way down to the bone. We need to feel His greatness. We need to be moved by it, affected by it. Regardless of circumstances and surroundings, regardless of your emotional state, believe thoroughly all that God has revealed in His Word concerning Himself. All my bones shall say, who is like unto thee? Who is like unto thee? He sees His immensity. He sees and feels the magnificence and the majesty of God. These are the words of a man who has been brought face to face with God. Oh, that we would say with the psalmist, all my bones shall say, Lord. Who is like unto thee? The psalmist writes in Psalm 48 and verse 1, great is the Lord. A declaration of His prominence and distinction. And we ought to declare His prominence and His distinction. But we need something more than declaring it. We need to feel it. We need to feel it all the way down to the bone, where it affects us, where it moves us. The psalmist asked in Psalm 77:13, who is so great as our God? No one. No one. We need to feel that. Needs to affect us. Needs to affect our lives. God's people talk about the greatness of God, but it has no effect in their lives. What's the use? How deeply do we feel it? Psalm 86:10, we hear the psalmist say, "For thou art great, and doest wondrous things. Thou art God alone." If He's God alone, why you seek anyone else? Thou art God alone. Psalm 95:3, "For the Lord is great, a great God, a great King, above all gods." Psalm 96:4, "For the Lord is great and greatly to be praised. He is to be feared above all gods." We read in Psalm 145 and verse 3, "Great is the Lord. His greatness is unsearchable." In Psalm 150 verse 2, we read of His excellent greatness. Greatness that excels. But do we feel it? Does it impact our lives? The common spiritual disease of humanity causes man to want to reduce God to a manageable size so that he can be flattered and bribed, so that man can fit this God in wherever and whenever they please. So that His commands really don't mean much. They become empty and meaningless. That's the God that man wants. A God that they can manage. A God that they can control. A God that they can neglect, but He will be there if they need Him. That's the God the world wants. But that's not God. God is great above all. He excels all. And He cannot be brought down to a manageable size. He is the God of all might. He is sovereign God with absolute authority and dominion over all. He rules. He's in control. He manages all things. He directs. He guides. He governs all things. And He does so according to His purpose and pleasure, which, by the way, cannot be thwarted. Oh, to feel that. All my bones shall say, "Lord, who is like unto Thee?" To be affected by that. To be moved by who He is. Oh, to live this. All my bones shall say, "Lord, who is like unto Thee?" The God who excels all and who is almighty and who is sovereign in every realm and who knows all and who is all sufficient and who is always everywhere present and who is immutable. This God is my strength, my rock, my fortress, my deliverer, my high tower, my refuge, my stay. Are we moved? Does that impact our life? We need to believe Him. Just believe what He says. And trust what He says. Depend upon Him. Lean upon Him. Walk with Him. Go to Him. Talk with Him. Cast all upon Him. All my bones shall say, Lord, who is like unto Thee? May this be our life. May this be our life every day. To be moved, to be deeply impacted by who God is. Again, people can know a lot of truth and not be affected by it. My question is, if you are not affected by known truth, do you really know it? I don't think so. Know it up here. But if that's the only place it is, it doesn't help us a whole lot. I'm not saying it's useless, because truth is always useful. But it needs to be our life. We need to be impacted by it, moved by it, down to the bone. Down to the bone, we need to feel who the Lord is and the greatness of God. Brother Ben, if you'll come and lead us verse of song.